as you're talking about the licensing deal, Jim, it sounds like a big part of what you did was negotiating this licensing deal. I mean, you're not just the draftsman of these agreements. You're playing a lead role in negotiating these deals, right?
Yeah, negotiating is a big part of what I do, and it always has been. In fact, my mother taught me how to negotiate.
Here we go. I knew Mom was coming in today.
Yeah.
And it's a positive way. That's good.
In a positive way. I attribute all my negotiating success to my mother. But I can remember, there were probably other things that she did, but I can remember one time, and she was what you call a highly motivated negotiator. She wasn't a lawyer, but she negotiated herself through life. She has 4 children, and I grew up in a 1-bedroom apartment.
Wow.
And it worked okay. Well, my brother and I and my sister shared the bedroom. My parents were on a pull-out couch. But when my youngest sister came along, that was number 4, and her crib was in the living room. So my mother decided we needed to get out of this 1-bedroom apartment. And so she made a campaign that was ultimately successful in doing that, but there were a lot of bumps along the way. And my earliest negotiation that I can remember, I was, let's see, probably about 11 or so. And my youngest sister was not quite 1. And I remember my mother taking me to a real estate agent's, a leasing agent's office, and he's going over the form with my mother. My mother's sitting the way you are, and I'm kind of standing next to her because they only have 1 chair. And he said, they're filling out the little form, and he's writing it down. My mother's answering the questions, and he comes to the question that my mother always dreaded, which was about children. So he says, "So, got any kids?" My mother just didn't say anything, just points to me, who's standing right next to her dutiful son. And he says, "Yeah." He said something like, "Just 1, right?" And my mother doesn't say anything, just shakes her head no. He says, "2?" My mother again doesn't say anything, just shakes her head no. And finally she says, "3?" And nope. She said, "Lady, you got 4 kids? How do you expect to get an apartment with 4 kids?" And so my mother says, "Well, you know, how many kids do I have to get an apartment? The most these people will take is 2. So my mother gets up out of her chair, leans across at the leasing agent and says, "You mean if I had 2 kids, I could get this apartment?" And he says, "Yeah." She says, "But you don't have 2 kids." My mother takes me by the shoulder, sits me down in her chair and says, "Jimmy, you sit there. Don't let this man give that apartment away to anybody else. I'm going home and drown your brother and one of your sisters." So that's kind of the negotiating skills that I grew up with. And I'd like to tell you,
Mom likes to win her negotiation.
Yeah, and she's not afraid to
make sacrifices.
To make sacrifices. But I would like to tell you, it's a fairy tale story, and he reached across the desk and said, "Here's the apartment." Well, he didn't have the apartment. It wasn't his decision to make, so he couldn't give her that. But he got kind of an empathy for her and looked out for her, and I think it was about 4 weeks later that he called one an apartment that would take kids. And so I learned from my mother a number of things about negotiation that I use in my practice today.